Live, where news comes first. This is ABC-7 Extra.
Welcome to ABC-7 Extra. I'm Maria Garcia. Glad you're with us today. Tonight we're talking about one of the most contentious issues in Texas politics. Whether local law enforcement should enforce immigration law or ask someone about their immigration status. Conservatives say so-called sanctuary cities like El Paso, where law enforcement does not ask for immigration status, should be banned. Democrats say there are more pressing issues state lawmakers should be dealing with, like education. The debate is going on in the Texas legislature right now. Out of committee, Republican Senator Charles Perry from Lubbock introduced a bill to ban sanctuary cities like El Paso. Again, in sanctuary cities, agencies like the sheriff's office, the police department, they don't ask a person's immigration status. County Sheriff Richard Wiles has been vocal about this in the past, saying his deputies should not engage in federal immigration law and should allocate their resources for more pressing matters. Joining us tonight, conservative activist, member of the El Paso Republican Party, Barbara Carrasco, and Robert Heyman with the Border Network for Human Rights. You can be part of the discussion by emailing us at ABC7Extra at KVIA.com, calling us at 496-1775, or tweeting me at MariaGABC7. Joining us now, Barbara Carrasco and Robert Heyman. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
It's always good to have both of you here. Thank you. So we did ask the sheriff's office if they could be here, but unfortunately they were unavailable. But I want to start with asking you, Barbara, about law enforcement experts. I mean, shouldn't we leave the policing with the local law enforcement experts? And if our elected sheriff is saying it's not in the interest of public safety to check immigration status, shouldn't we trust him as the expert?
Well, I don't agree with that statement. The immigration, although it is a function of the federal government, does give authority to the local law enforcement agencies in the course of their, say, a legal stop, the ability to ask someone's immigration status. And I believe it's very important. The reason for that is a sanctuary city, we have illegal immigrants and they have not had a background test, they have not had a biometrics test, they have not had a medical exam. We don't know who they are. Being an illegal immigrant is more of a reactive status for the police force than a proactive. And by that I mean we don't know who they are until after there's a crime committed. So it's not fair for the public not to know who these illegal immigrants in our cities are. Whereas a legal immigrant goes through a background check, biometrics tests, a medical exam. We know who they are, so it's proactive because anybody who doesn't qualify is not allowed citizenship. So I think that for the safety of the citizens, that the police are obligated to ask who they are, their immigration status, because under the federal law, the local police department is not given the right to turn a blind eye on illegal immigrants.
Now, Sheriff Richard Wiles has been quoted as saying in the past, what's next, though? Is a local law enforcement agent going to check if you've paid your federal taxes? You know, like, where do you draw the line between using your resources for local issues and federal issues?
Well, you draw the line at safety. And part of our safety is knowing who's in our country. You don't know if they're gang members. You don't know if they've committed a murder. You don't know if they're pedophiles. You don't know if they're rapists. That's why we need to know who's in our communities and not after the fact. So that's where you draw the line, the safety of the citizen.
Robert, what do you think about that?
I mean, that's blatantly misleading and untrue. First of all, El Paso is one of the safest cities in the country. We've had policies about not asking for immigration status for decades, yet we have a crime rate in El Paso that's 70% of the statewide average. We have homicide rates that are nearly unheard of in large cities in the United States. We've consistently been one of the safest large cities in the U.S. for a decade. El Paso is doing something right, and a big part of that is building trust with the community by not asking about immigration status, so that people feel comfortable reporting crime to the police, telling police about things that they witness, and that makes the community safer.
But I have to ask, law enforcement is here to uphold the law, and it is illegal to be here illegally. So, bottom line, so why shouldn't they be allowed to check?
The Supreme Court has consistently ruled that immigration is a matter of federal prerogative, and solely a federal prerogative. States and localities do not have the authority under the Constitution to preempt the authority of the federal government. That's what this would do. This would put states and localities into enforcing federal law in a way that would conflict with federal enforcement, that would preempt federal enforcement, and that would be pretty blatantly unconstitutional.
That's a false statement. Under the federal law, what the local municipalities are expected to do is ask for immigrant status, and if it's an illegal immigrant, they report it to the federal immigration, and they take over at that point. There isn't any preemptive actions here. They're following the law, and the law is they're supposed to ask
Under
the immigration
what federal
status.
law?
Well, there's the Immigration Nationality Act, which gives that authority to local municipalities.
It gives that authority to the federal government to
No.
enter into agreements with localities at the federal government's choosing. Programs like 287G have been retired by the federal government. It takes an act of the federal government to initiate
There is from the
a
Office
program
of
like that. It can't be done by a
Yes.
locality or by a state.
Yes, it can. There's an opinion, a memorandum from the Office of Legal Counsel, which specifically states, and it outlines the limited resources and guidelines for local municipalities, and one of them is on a routine stop, you can ask immigration status, and then you turn it over to immigration, to the federal government.
I want to ask, one of the arguments against sanctuary cities is that local policies like that, in the long run, have a cumulative effect that undermines federal law because it facilitates being here illegally, because it facilitates illegal immigration, thus encourages it.
Immigration isn't driven by policies like this. Immigration is driven by the relative economic well-being of the United States and the world. As long as the United States has a strong economy, as long as the United States is a place that people can turn to for safety and security, people are going to come to the United States. So
But if you make
policy
it
like saying-
easier to be here, won't more people stay here longer illegally?
And we have a rule of law. We have laws that they've got to abide by. That's the bottom line.
Right, but the rules that we have to, the laws that we have to abide by place us clearly under the authority of the federal government, and it's up to the federal government to enforce immigration law. It violates the rule of law. It undermines the rule of law to enact a policy like this.
It does not violate the law. There has been court cases, and that memorandum from the Office of Legal Counsel specifically states, and I don't have the laws in front of me, but it specifically referred to cases where the federal government gave limited authority to the local police
The federal
departments.
government gave,
That does
not
not
the state of
conflict.
Texas and not the
But it gives it
local
to-
authority.
but it gives it
But
to
it has
local
to be initiated by
municipalities.
the federal government.
Yes,
We're
and it
talking
has been.
about a program, but it's not now. The federal government has rescinded all 287G
no, there's an opinion in
programs.
2005 which specifically states.
2005
Yes.
is before SB 1070 in Arizona was
And
struck
even
down
it-
by the Supreme Court.
But they left in there that-
2005 is under a different administration. 2005 is before the period when the federal government stopped entering into 287G agreements. There are no active 287G
This
agreements.
Arizona law left in there specifically that local authorities had the right and could not turn a blind eye to illegal immigration.
Okay,
They specifically
And
left
that
in the
law was ruled unconstitutional.
Not that portion of the
Ma'am,
law.
if we're going to uphold the rule of law, we need to follow the Constitution. We need to respect the authority of the federal government.
I want to talk about safety. Barbara, wouldn't this just increase unreported crime? I mean, really, if a woman is getting physically abused and she's here illegally, and she's probably going to get discouraged when it comes time to calling the police. She probably won't want to call the police if she's here illegally because she doesn't want to be deported, doesn't want to be separated from her family, from her children, if her children are U.S. citizens. So don't you have people who could be victimized and don't want to call local law enforcement?
And you make my very point. If local authorities were enforcing the law, we wouldn't be here tonight. We wouldn't have women here being abused. We wouldn't have illegal immigrants being exploited.
But you heard Barbara saying illegal immigration is a rule of the world. As long as there are better economies in the world and there are people struggling in other countries and they think they're going to give their families a better life, there's going to be migration, and so there's going to be here. And
there's a process by which they can come to the United States.
Right, but once they're here, once they're here, and they're here illegally,
right,
and they're being victimized, and they don't want to call local law enforcement because they're afraid they're going to be deported. I mean, it's a complex issue, but won't crime go unreported?
Well, number one, they come and they set themselves up to be exploited. And that's why it's so important that they obey the law, because they will have protections under law. They won't have fears calling the police to come in and help them out for fear of being deported and stuff. That's why it's so important to follow the law. So once they come and say they're being abused and they're afraid to call the law, they have put themselves in that position simply by refusing to follow the law.
Research out of the University of Illinois Chicago and the University of Houston shows that 29% of U.S.-born Latinos would not want to interact with police if they thought they were going to be asked about their immigration status. Those are U.S.-born citizen Latinos who would be scared away from interacting with police. 50% of legal residents, of Hispanic legal residents who came here legally through the process that Barbara mentioned, would be scared away from reporting crime to police. This is absolutely going to make crime go unreported. It's going to undermine trust between the community and the police. It's going to undermine the community policing model that has served El Paso and other cities around the state and country so well. There's a reason why 54 of the 55 largest police and sheriff's departments in the state have policies like this, because they've come together around this policy as the best practice for local law enforcement to make sure that crime goes reported and their communities are safe, secure, and prosperous.
Okay. That's not necessarily true, because some states that have sanctuary policies are changing their policies, and in particular in California, some of the cities in California, because it's not working.
Okay, we have to take a break because we're getting phone calls. We're going to prepare them, and then we're going to be back with your phone calls. So stay with us. You're watching ABC-7 Extra. We're talking about sanctuary cities. If you'd like to share your comments or your questions, you can email us at ABC7Extra@KVIA.com, tweet me at Maria G ABC7, or call us at 496-1775. We'll be right back.
First.
ABC-7 Extra, we're talking about sanctuary cities today. Joining me, Robert Heyman and Barbara Carrasco. Thank you again. Let's get to Twitter. We have quite a few tweets from Cesar. Undocumented people victimized by domestic violence and rape will fear seeking help from the police department and the sheriff's office. Bill ensures they stay trapped. Jaime Abetia says, how can Ms. Carrasco from the Party of Family Values be okay with undermining trust with immigrants? It allows domestic violence crimes to go unchecked. Our community is less safe when immigrants fear turning to law enforcement to report crimes. How can Ms. Carrasco be okay with that? Do you want to respond to that?
Yes, it's not that I'm okay with that. What I'm saying is we have rules, we have laws. If people follow the laws, they will not be exploited. It's going to happen if you come in and you're in the shadows and you expect to be protected. Of course they're going to be fearful of the police because they're here illegally.
But there's already 11 million people here.
It's their mentality. How do we get them into assimilate them into society? You're saying, how do we accept them into our community?
How do
solve issues of domestic violence for undocumented immigrants by punishing them, by uprooting them from their lives, by taking them away from their families.
I'm not saying that. I'm saying that they set themselves up for that abuse.
And your solution is to punish them by using the police as an agent to deport them.
Laws are not punishment. Laws are to protect the people. If they would not fear the laws if they were here legally, Robert. If you help these people be here legally, rather than trying to protect them.
If over a quarter of U.S.-born citizen Latinos fear interacting with the police because they think they'll be asked about their immigration status, those are people who don't have a reason to be afraid. They don't have any of that reason to be afraid, but they're still not going to go to the police. So by targeting undocumented migrants, by punishing these victims of crimes, you're going to make the community less safe, and you're going to put the onus on the victim.
Their fear is multiplied exponentially because they're here illegally.
And policies like this are going to make it worse.
If a legal individual, like you state, if a legal Latino is afraid to contact the authorities, then someone who is in the shadows, their fear is going to be multiplied exponentially because they are here feeling secretive.
Why are we looking to multiply that fear? Why are
We're
we
not.
looking
We
to
want to
solve
say
domestic
follow-
violence issues
follow the laws
by
and
targeting the
let's-
victims
we're
rather than by targeting
we're
the
try-
perpetrators?
The laws
We need
are
law
the
enforcement
laws
to be
will
going
protect
after
them from
perpetrators.
exploitation.
Okay,
The laws
let's
is
get-
what protects them.
Okay, let's get to our phone calls. Let's get to our first caller. Hi, what's your comment or your question?
Yes, this is for the Border Rights Network guy. When you have an open border, you know who's coming in, cartel members, ISIS terrorists, what have you. We need to stop, secure the border before it's too late, before we have ISIS flying the black flag over El Paso. Thank you very much.
Do you want to respond to
There's
that? Public
absolutely no evidence that there's been any terrorism that's come through the southern border. Moreover, the federal government has more than doubled the number of Border Patrol agents on the southern border over the past decade. We have more operational control. We have more people in the field than we ever have before. To act like that we have an open border is just ridiculous and wrong. And a policy like this isn't going to address that. It's just going to target people who are already here, make them feel unsafe in their communities, uprooted in their communities, unable to use basic services like hospitals.
They already feel that way.
The author of this bill says that the illegal immigrants are here who do happen to have a criminal record. Say these criminals swarm into our major cities knowing full well nothing will be done to them. The rule of law is important. A society without law is anarchy.
Nothing will be done to them. It's too bad that we have prisons, that we have jails, that we have systems that are working effectively. El Paso has the lowest crime rate, has one of the lowest crime rates in the state for a reason. El Paso is as safe as it is because it doesn't do things like this.
Okay, and this is from Fidel emailing us. Republicans are always crying about less government, except when it comes to minorities. Immigrants create jobs, contribute to the economy through taxes, and enrich our culture. What right does Texas have to ban a city for protecting its citizens? What legal implications are at stake by being banned? And I want to just answer his last question. The bill that's being considered right now would withhold state funding for sanctuary cities, particularly kind of state funding.
Well, I think.
Do you want to respond to what he talked about, the Republican Party?
You want to read that again? Because it was such a...
Sure. Republicans are always crying about less government, except when it comes to minorities. Immigrants create jobs, contribute to the economy through taxes, and enrich our culture.
The statement that we want less government unless it deals with minorities is just blatantly wrong. What we're saying is we've got laws, and we want to protect these people, these illegal immigrants that are here and who are being exploited. If they followed the law, they would not be exploited. We don't want people exploited. We don't want them living in fear. And the way to less fear and no exploitation is through doing it through the law.
But isn't it true though, Barbara? And I think the point that Robert keeps that we try to go back and forth with this is, in a perfect world, yes, everybody would follow the law and everybody would come here legally, and there would be a legal framework that would deal with immigration properly. But the reality is that there are millions of people already here. And so my question before was, how do we enforce proper public safety protocols that allows for victims to speak out without fearing being deported?
Well, Sheriff Weil said he spent, millions of dollars developing a relationship with the illegal immigrant community in El Paso, and he doesn't want to, ruin that if this bill passes. Well,
I'm sorry, I don't know.
Okay,
He was quoted as saying that he spent millions of dollars
of taxpayer dollars in developing a relationship with the illegal immigrant community in El Paso. It's in the paper. So my response to that is, if it's working so well, why are they still not reporting crime?
They are reporting crime.
You just said they're not. You said they're
I
afraid
said
to
that
report
they're
crime.
afraid to report crime if they think that the police are going to be going to be asking about immigration status. If police aren't going to be asking about immigration status, that fear goes away. They are reporting crime, and we get a situation like El Paso where we have one of the safest communities in the country.
But Robert, if elected officials decide that they don't want to enforce specific laws that they think will hurt public safety in their communities, where does that principle stop? Does that set a dangerous precedent? Can some elected officials then not enforce, other federal laws, like federal drug laws?
And they arbitrarily decide which laws not to enforce.
But that's an unfair proposition because their state, local authorities don't have the training, don't have the expertise, and don't have the mandate to enforce some of these federal statutes. That's why we have agencies like the FBI, the DEA, ICE, that do this work. This is not work that local law enforcement is trained to do. It would take millions of dollars, months of training where people can't be on the streets, can't be responding to emergency calls,
But the question was, does this set a precedent where local law enforcement officials, like Barbara said, can arbitrarily decide which federal laws?
Well, this isn't arbitrary. This is something that is, and the courts have consistently ruled, is the sole purview of the federal government.
But they've given local municipalities the authority to ask on a routine
If the federal
call.
government initiates that agreement with the municipality, we're talking about a state law that would force municipalities to do this.
Okay, we have to take a break. I'm sorry. We have to go to our phone lines. We're taking Marcus from the East Side and Rosa from Kern Place. When we come back, stay with us. To ABC-7 Extra, we're talking about sanctuary cities tonight. Let's go to the phone lines. Marcus on the East Side. Marcus, what's your comment or your question?
Yeah, I had a comment that Robert Heyman said that immigration is a prerogative. It's not a prerogative. It's a law, so it is illegal. And I don't see a problem with local agencies asking for immigration status because we should know the status of people committing crimes or suspected of committing crimes.
Okay, thank you very much, Robert. So he says he doesn't see the problem.
Well, he may not see a problem, but the U.S. Supreme Court has consistently seen a problem and has left this as the sole prerogative of the U.S. federal government. The Supremacy Clause is one of the key parts of the U.S. Constitution, and that reserves certain powers to the federal government. If states and localities want to get into this, they may not see it as a problem, but the feds do, and it would be unconstitutional.
Well, the federal government has not seen a problem. That's why they've given local municipalities the authority to ask on a routine stop immigration status. And if there's anything there that's improper, then they report it to the federal government. They're not doing the federal government's job. They're merely asking a question and then turning them over to the federal government, and they do their job.
They do
That's
something
it. And
at
it
the
wouldn't take
discretion of the
millions of
federal
dollars
government.
to ask a question or train the police officers
Yes,
or
it
the
does.
sheriff's
Immigration law
department to
is
ask
complex.
a question.
Knowing what people are here, under what visas, what things they're permitted to do.
And if they say they're here illegally, or if they find that they're illegally, it's immediately a federal issue, which has nothing to do with the police taking that case further. They don't need millions of dollars of training to ask a question.
But they need
and
millions of
determine
dollars
whether or
of
not.
training to be able to determine what activities under what visas are proper, what are improper. There are reasons why federal immigration law is as complex as it is and requires special types of attorneys and training and agencies.
No, it doesn't,
Local law enforcement is not trained for this. It would
Under
be
under the president's
unfunded
recent executive order, if a policeman asks someone their immigration status and they say that they're here illegally, or they think that they fall under DACA, they're to be let go. Now, that didn't take millions of dollars to train and ask a question, and this won't either.
It's much easier to train someone not to do something than it is to do something. We're talking about having to
It's easier to
train.
let illegal immigrants come over here and not teach them that there's a law and a proper path to
Barbara,
citizenship.
I want to ask you, somebody, Cesar tweeted, Ms. Carrasco basically said undocumented status is to blame for abuse and exploitation. Safety is a human right. Hashtag victim blaming.
What I'm saying is they set themselves up by coming into the United States illegally, living in the shadows, and expecting protection when they themselves fear law enforcement because they know they came here illegally.
See how that kind of sounds like, oh, they came here illegally.
No, I'm saying if they followed the law, they wouldn't have the
infant?
fear.
Someone who is brought here as an infant, someone who's
That's
brought
a
here
totally different story.
But these are people who would still be affected by that law. If that's a totally different story, then they're still going to be penalized, they're still going to be punished by a law like this.
Adrian writes, why don't these people enter our city through our ports of entry? Oh, that's right, they can't. They do not have permission to be here because of something in their background, usually.
And that's why we need to know who's here. And illegal immigration does not give us an opportunity to do a background check, to weed the gangsters, the rapists, the murderers. They may have a rap sheet three pages long, and we don't know till after the fact.
There's no one better at weeding out criminals than communities themselves. Building relationships of trust between law enforcement and communities is going to weed those criminals out when people feel safe reporting criminal activity, reporting suspicious activity.
We're running out of time, so I really want to make sure we get to this caller. Rosa in Kern Place. Hi, Rosa. What's your comment or your question?
Is this policy followed just in the border with Mexico, or is it also followed with the border with Canada and the United States? Thank you.
That's a really good question. I'm not sure if there are sanctuary cities in the border with Canada because that border is just essentially much more open.
New York has some sanctuary cities.
I'm sorry?
New York has sanctuary cities, so that's up northeast. But the legislation that they're speaking about now, if she's referring to that, is specifically Texas.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. Exactly. This is going on in the Texas legislature. I'm not, in terms of northern cities, I would have to look into that.
I think this actually raises a good point because this law doesn't provide any sort of guidance to officers on how it would be enforced. So how do you enforce it? Do you just judge people by how they sound, by the color of their skin? I mean, there are undocumented immigrants from places other than Mexico and Central America. And if we're not applying this evenly, then we're but if we're not applying this evenly, then we're undermining equal protection. We're undermining the 14th Amendment.
It applies to any illegal immigrant.
There's absolutely no guideline in the law about how this is to be enforced. It's left completely to the whim of the officer. That leaves it open to highly unequal enforcement and a complete undermining of equal protection.
There is this concern that it'll lead to racial profiling.
Well, you know what? We can't let racial profiling paralyze us from enforcing the law. It's pretty sad when the day comes when legislatures have to spend time, money, and energy passing bills so that law enforcement can carry out the law, which is what they're to do, law enforcement. And that's where we're at today. We're upside down. We turn on our heads. I don't know how it happened, but at some point in time, Robert, there has to be a limit. There has to be a point at which we say, okay, illegal immigration, we're going to take a hard stance on it. There's a way to come into the country. I've been to 4 U.S. citizenship swearings in. They have earned a path to citizenship. They have earned every right, privilege, and benefit that the United States of America has to offer a citizen.
We're not talking about making these people citizens. We're talking about offering them basic safety against criminals in the communities where they live.
You're not doing a good job if they still fear the police.
But they don't fear the police if we don't have laws like this.
But if we don't have laws like this, you can't continue for eternity dealing with illegal immigration. You have to, at some point in time, say, okay, we have laws. We want you to be protected. We don't want you to live in fear. We want you to be part of the community. We want you to have the same rights and privileges.
So you're going to draw the line then on immigration at a point that embraces racial profiling, which raises serious constitutional concerns,
that's an excuse.
And which punishes victims, which punishes crime victims.
You're using excuses not to carry out the law.
Okay, we've run out of time. Thank you so much for joining us. And I want to say, Barbara, I'm so sorry I said you were representing the El Paso Republican Party today, but you came as a conservative activist, as a concerned citizen, not an official representative of the Republican Party. I'm sorry, that was my mistake. Thank you. I appreciate your passion. It's always good to have both of you here. Always great, really enlightening, both of you. And thank you so much for joining us on ABC-7 Extra. We hope you found this enlightening, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.